All right, we're going to get underway. Everybody staying dry? Yes. We need the rain? Do we? Yes. Good. Cool. All right. Welcome to the, what's this month? August meeting of the Eastern Missouri Beekeepers Association. If that's not why you're here, we recommend that you stay and we will welcome you. Have a snack. All right. Got a few announcements and then we will get to the Missouri State Fair awards that were won by the club. So this month was a pretty good month. We had Corey Stevens' Queen Ring class and the extravaganza. All that went well. Appreciate everybody who helped or participated in all of that. I hope you got something good out of that, especially that class, and you would have got some good honey out of your extracting. So that's good too. Open apiary days again. We do that twice a month. This month it's August 16. That's this Saturday, isn't it? Yes. This Saturday, 16th and the 23rd. It's a great way to get in with some experienced beekeepers who are able to tell you what you're looking at, in case you haven't figured that out yet, which is not a surprise for me sometimes. What is that? I say that a lot when I look. What is that? Why is that there? Okay. And this Sunday also, this Sunday is Great Plains this Sunday, Ken? Next Sunday. Next Sunday. Great Plains Master Beekeeper Open Area is, what is that, 24th? 24th. I think that's the 24th. Anyway, it's not this Sunday, but next Sunday from 12 to 2 at Isabee's in Fenton. There's some classroom time, and then there's some time in the hives as well. Ken Heidkamp, our most recent certified master beekeeper, heads that program. Also, we get a lot of requests for presentations, on various aspects of honeybees and pollinators and beekeeping and all that kind of stuff. We are not always able to accommodate those with just the few people that we do know who do that. So if you have any experience with that, or you can do it, you like to do it, you have done it, you'd like to learn how to do it, whatever. We're looking for more people who are willing to do that. So on our website, there is a brief form for you to fill out, just some basic questions about you and beekeeping. So if you are interested in doing that, go to our website. It's under the Programs tab, just a brief form, Programs tab, and then Presenters form. So if you're interested in that, let me see a show of hands of all the people who are interested in doing that. All right. Okay, good. Good. Say what? Anywhere from about first graders to 12th graders in second grade. That's in there. Okay. Cool. And yeah, we get high schools, grade schools, we get senior citizens' homes, we get libraries, all kinds of people who are interested in presenting something about beekeeping. So please consider that and take a look at that form. If you can't find the form, just email us at info@easternmobeekeepers.com and we'll give you some directions to that. All right. In November, the we hold elections for all board positions at the November monthly club meeting. It's on a 2-year rotation, and this is the year we will be doing that. So we will be taking, if you're interested in serving on the board in various capacities, contact me and we can go from there. The officers are president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, program chairperson, communications coordinator, social media coordinator. And then we have 2 members who are on the board who are just, we call them member advisors. They are just members of the club who attend our board meetings, have all the rights and privileges thereof. That's legalese. So we're looking, we'll have those 2 positions opened as well. So if that's something you're interested in for a 2-year term, contact me. You can find all of that information about what each position, the responsibilities of each position on our website as well, the homepage. You go to EMBA tab, our purpose and our bylaws, and you can find all that information there. All right, the fall picnic. We will not have a meeting here in September. The meeting will be at Emba Park on September the 2nd Tuesday of the month, whatever, 7th, noon to 4. Is that right, the 7th? Oh, that's a Sunday though. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah, all right. Still, don't come here. All right, don't come here next month. Just go to Emba Park and then go home. All right. So the club's going to provide, Laura? Right. Yeah, the club will provide pulled pork, pulled chicken, all the fixings for all of that. And we just want you to RSVP so we know how much food to purchase for that. Also, you'll find all kinds of information about that on the website as well. Bring your own drinks, okay? And if you've got mead, please bring that. What else? Oh, the dishes, A to I is a side dish. Desserts is J to P, and a salad is Q to Z. If you say it fast enough, it's kind of like a nursery rhyme, so you can. Never mind. There will also be a honey exchange. You can bring up to 3 bottles of honey, of your honey. You'll get a ticket for every bottle that you bring, and then we will draw those tickets, and you can choose someone else's bottle of honey to try different areas of the, I would say, not the country, but the different areas of St. Louis. And you will go home, you should go home with as many bottles as you brought, okay? Joe? What size bottle? Gallon jugs. Gallon jugs. So, no, just pound, 1 pound. Whatever, typically sell your honey in 1 pound, glass, plastic, whatever. All right? Okay. Our workshop is the workshop 26 and the banquet. Put that on your calendar. That's next February 20 and Saturday 21. It's again at the Holiday Inn. So save that date. We typically, as usual, we have our absolute beginners course. We have an intermediate course, intermediate to advanced. We'll have the honey show. Are we having the judging, teaching? Do we know yet? Okay. So we'll be doing lessons on or teaching on how to become a judge in a honey show. We'll have our own honey show, lots of vendors, the banquet Friday night, all that good stuff. But we will have something new. So if you go from your first year of beekeeping and then you go to the advanced classes, so you've done 1 year, and a lot of these other people, most of these other people have doing this for 5 to 20 or more years. And so a lot of the speakers are geared to that. So we have done something a little different. So you might want to check that out. So if you're in an advanced class like comparative genomics of eusocial species, after 1 year, see, you didn't even think that was funny. So you might be in over your head. So what we're doing on Friday afternoon is we're going to have a class specifically for those people, first or second year beekeepers, who have classes, several, who, okay, my honey's made it through the winter, my bees made it through the winter. Now what do I do? Instead of the genomics of eusocial species. So that will be helpful. And you can still go to, in fact, you have to sign up for the workshop to be able to come to those classes. Minimal charge for that. So that's new. Also, the North American Bee Expo is having, you might have seen it in the newsletter that went out last evening. They're offering 40 scholarships or sponsorships for young people from the ages of 10 to 20. They are paying for the tickets for the student and a guardian if the student is under 18 years of age, and up to $3 hotel reimbursement. So that's still in Kentucky. I guess it'll be next year, right? Yeah. So there's a link on our website to all that information as well. So, and did everybody get a ticket, a raffle ticket? Okay, cool. Oh, we have a need of a ticket. We're going to raffle off a t-shirt a little later. Just want to make sure everybody's got a ticket. And now we will get to the winners of the honey show at the state fair. Now we had a lot of people went in and a lot of people won. I will give the class and the winner no applause until we're all done. Then you can clap, give standing ovation, whatever you want to do. But for class 1, cut comb in plastic boxes, Barbara Bossert and second, and Rick Alfalter was fourth. Round or square selection comb, Rick again, second place. Light extracted honey, Ken Heidkamp second, Rick Alfalter third, Dennis Niedrauer fourth, and Melissa Sossman sixth. Class 5 amber extracted, first Ken Heidkamp, and fifth Rick Alfalter. And dark extracted, third place Ken Heidkamp. Sealed honey shallow frame, that's from a super. That is Melissa Sossman, second place. Creamed honey, third place, Michael Godfrey. Yellow beeswax, a 3-pound block, Ken Heidkamp second, and Michael Godfrey fourth. Bees in an observation hive, first place, Melissa Sossman, and third place, Rick Alfalter. So that's all the individuals and all that they did. And then our groups, which, by the way, we won the grand champion group. So now, if our speaker tonight was not Eugene Makovec from Three Rivers, I don't know if Ken would have given quite the announcement that he did. But it's always Ken's intention to win the grand champion of group and snatch it away from the hands of Eugene Makovec and Three Rivers Bee Club. All in good fun. All in good fun. And so with that, cut comb in group categories, Rick Allfalter third, light extracted honey, Ken Heidkamp first, Rick third, Dennis Niedrauer fourth, and Melissa Sossman fifth. Ken Heidkamp under amber extracted second, Rick Allfalter fourth, and Melissa Sossman sixth. The dark extracted, Ken Heidkamp third, the beeswax, Ken Heidkamp second, and Michael Godfrey fourth. So congratulations to everyone on that. We did have one person who did enter but didn't win, Casey Catalano. But thanks for entering, Casey. We appreciate that. So, all right, that's all I have. I think that's all I have. Oh, Eugene's leaving. So, it's really a slow time in beekeeping right now, especially if you are treating. Does anybody have any questions that you're just totally stumped on that you would like to ask of what's going on now? You don't even have to be totally stumped. You might just have a question. Joe.
Have really high plant counts this year.
Yeah.
I haven't had 8 years. Is that happening?
Yeah, I'm hearing that a lot. I have not had that issue. The best thing you can do, obviously, and you probably can't move any hives right now, but keep them in full sun. There are some beetle traps, all kinds of them on the market. One of the best things that people have found work is Swiffer sheets, unscented Swiffer sheets. Cut those like in half, stick them in the corners of the boxes. The bees should drive them into those areas, and they'll be caught in the fibers of the dryer of those sheets. So yeah, but you got to be careful because they will slime a hive if your hive isn't strong enough to take care of it. Having some beetles in there is probably not that big a deal if the hive is strong enough to take care of the beetles and drive them away. So, anything else? Question, Denise.
When you're using the instructions, it talks about using half dose. I don't know what the hive is worthy of size that needs a half dose versus full dose.
Usually, right. Well, it should on the pamphlet, I don't know if you got a box or just some trays, but it should say on the box, and if it doesn't, a single deep would require a half of a tray. And I've done that. I just find a little piece of cardboard, scoop out about half of whatever's in the tray, put it on there and place it on top of the frames. And then a double deep will need one full tray placed between the hives, the two boxes. All right. Mm-hmm. Anything else? All right. Check us out or hit us up after the meeting. If you come up with a question, we'll certainly want to answer them and keep you and your bees happy. All right. As we mentioned, Eugene Makovec is our speaker for this evening. He's a 30-year, third-generation beekeeper, keeps about a dozen colonies in Lincoln County. He is the editor of American Bee Journal since 2018 and is serving a second stint as president of Three Rivers, correct?
No, I don't know.
Not after losing the grand championship, for sure. He has served on the board of the Missouri State Beekeepers Association for 11 years and is a two-time Missouri Beekeeper of the Year in 2006 and 2015. Now, Eugene did jump into the political arena in 2015, and he successfully spearheaded the objective to deregulate the sale of honey in Missouri by stripping it of the processed food designation. You know, your honey that you sell right from the hive is not processed food. And that caused a problem because people were required then to, in order to sell it to retail outlets, had to use a commercial kitchen. Eugene got that fixed for us. So he is going to talk about that, and he's going to talk about prepping your hives for winter by any kind of feeding. So with that, welcome Eugene Makovec. Got you all wired up.
See if you can dial me down back to earth here. That might have been me dropping it into my pocket. I don't know. How's that? I feel loud. Is it too loud back there? Dial me down a little bit more. While he's doing that, a couple words on that state fair thing. Back when I was, I edited the Missouri State newsletter for 11 years. And throughout most of that time, that club award was passed back and forth between EMBA and Midwestern and Kansas City. Pretty much, I don't think there was anybody else that got it between that time. And then finally in 2016, Three Rivers, we jumped up and grabbed it, and we've had it ever since up until this year. I'll tell you also the difference between this year and last. Last year, I put us over the top with my 8th place ribbon and light extracted honey. I didn't enter this year, so you're welcome. I still feel like I'm loud. Is that just echo in my head here? Okay, yeah, that's. So, that's right, buttons are backwards. How do I turn this on? Oh, no, it's on. Yeah. Did I pick up the wrong thing there? Let me put mine in there. I know how to use it anyway.
Slideshow mode?
Huh?
I don't think it's in slideshow mode, is it?
No, it's not.
No, but earlier it did it.
Oh,
Locked.
that works.
This should all know.
Yeah, I got mine plugged in. I don't know why that one's not working. All right. I think that's a little better. Okay. So we put together this guide a few years ago, just because we continue to get questions about these things, and there's still some inspectors out there will unsolicited come along and crack down on somebody, and we point out the law to them, the new law that's now 10 years old, and oh yeah, okay, you're all right. So there's for that reason, we've got a document that we've put together. I got a handout that I'll hand out a little bit later, but that's why I try and get around and talk about these things. So I'm going to kind of give you the shorter. I have a longer version of this. I'm going to spare you some of the details, but short story on what the law was before was prior to 2015. This jams and jellies law, which also included honey for some odd reason, had been enacted in 2005. Nobody knew about it. I was selling honey. I lived in Kirkwood. I kept bees in Kirkwood and Ladue for about 15 years. I was selling honey, a couple of different retail places. Never ran into any problems at all. Didn't know anybody else who did. And suddenly I moved out to Lincoln County and I got in trouble. But this was where where we were. Under the law, it said that if you're producing honey in your own kitchen, bottling honey in your own kitchen like most of us do, you could only sell direct to consumer. And you had to put a label on there warning the consumer essentially that it was produced in a kitchen not inspected by the state or some governmental authority. You could not sell third party at all. And even if you sold only at farmers markets, direct to consumer, if you reached a level of $30,000 a year, you had to have that kitchen regardless. So like I said, none of this had ever occurred to any of us. Nobody was telling us about it. Suddenly in 2014, the state decided to start cracking down on these dangerous beekeepers. And like I said, I moved out to Lincoln County in 2012. We put honey in a local store in Winfield, had it there for a couple of years. Suddenly one day I got a call from a county inspector saying, "Hey, I just pulled your honey off the shelves because I don't have record of you having a commercial kitchen, an inspected kitchen," she called it. "Do you have an inspected kitchen?" I said, "What's an inspected kitchen?" Which more or less answered her question. But she explained to me some of the basics of this law. I asked her, she told me about this, you can sell direct to the consumer, but you can't sell through a third party and they sell consumer. And I said, "What's the difference? It's the same honey." She said, "Well, that's just the law." And then she talked about that upper threshold. And I said, again, what's the difference between this honey below 30,000 and the next bottle above? Well, that's just the law. And I asked her to direct me to that law, and she couldn't even do that. She said, "Let me put you in touch with the state inspector out of St. Louis. Her name is Virginia." I had a same conversation on the phone with her and didn't get a lot of sympathy out of either one of them. But the one thing I asked the first inspector, I said, I wasn't aware that Lincoln County had laws like this. When I lived in Kirkwood, I thought of Lincoln County as one of those places you go to get away from regulations. Your old fridge or washer craps out, you drag it to the front yard and use it for parts for a few years. One of the things I tell people, one of the great things about living where I do is I can pretty much do what I want on my own property. The downside is so can my neighbors, but for the most part, we all get along and we like it that way. So anyway, I was doing that Missouri newsletter at the time. I was also president of Three Rivers. That was my first stint. So I got up at Three Rivers and ranted and raved about this and heard from a couple other people who had just been visited to, called to by the same inspector. And I put it out there on the Missouri Beekeepers Facebook page. And so the Missouri State Beekeepers had this Virginia, the state inspector, speak at the fall meeting. She was not real well received. People were asking the same kind of questions I'd been asking. It was funny though, because she got up and the first thing she said was, "I know where you people are coming from because my husband and I were beekeepers too." Well, it became pretty clear that they'd not been beekeepers for long because she didn't have a clear understanding of this whole process of extracting honey and things. In fact, one of her ideas was, well, the local club can just have all its members come. You can rent a commercial kitchen and everybody can extract their honey that day and take it home with them. So somebody said, okay, so what, we put it in buckets and haul it home and then bottle? Oh, no. The whole thing, the whole process, the extracting, the bottling and everything has got to be done in that kitchen. Now, anybody who is selling honey through stores knows that you're not bottling all your honey that day. First of all, you don't know what sizes your stores are going to be buying. And secondly, you don't want to put it all in those bottles and have it crystallize, down the line. And then you got to deal with it there. So the whole thing was kind of ridiculous, but we kind of played a game of 20 questions with her, trying to figure out just what an inspected kitchen was, and kind of turned out where it varies by your local health departments. But by and large, it came down to either 3 or 4 stainless steel sinks, a floor drain, washable walls, covered lights. It had to be separate from your living space. You could have it attached to your house, but it had to be separate. You couldn't work in the kitchen and go back to your house and go to the bathroom. You had to have a bathroom attached to it, the separate septic system. It's all very pricey, and it's not something that most of us are going to do. So I don't know why it's okay. I don't know why I wasn't doing it before. Okay, so we got together at Three Rivers. Like I said, I was president at the time. I formed a committee and said, let's see if we can do something about this. And one thing, somebody had the bright idea, let's write a letter to the health department and just ask them, how many people are getting sick from eating honey prior to the enforcement of this law? We kind of figured they're not even going to answer us, but we'll see, right? So January, I was also on the board of the MSBA as newsletter editor. And so I brought this up and I said, we're seeing more of these crackdowns. I've heard from people in other counties because I'd written about it in a newsletter. We need to try and get this law changed. And I actually didn't get support there. There was one person that stood up and he said, well, what if we try to get this law changed and we fail? Aren't we just going to take off the health department? They're going to come down on us even harder. And another guy who was actually a former lobbyist said, it's already too late to do anything this year. And I said, what do you mean? The legislative session just started. It runs till mid-May. He said, yeah, but there's so many bills that pile up. You don't have something already pre-filed in December. Good luck getting it extracted from that pile at the end of the session. So the president said, okay, I'm tabling this. We'll take it up next year. So I thought, great. So I go home and I was rather frustrated. But in the meantime, I had been trying to reach my state senator. Jeannie Riddle had been my state rep, and November 14 was an election year. She got elected to the state Senate, so she was out of her House office, hadn't taken office yet in the Senate, so I left messages at both places and kind of gave up on it. Well, shortly after I got out of that MSBA meeting, a couple of weeks later, I hear from somebody, a new beekeeper that said, hey, I read your thing in the newsletter. I happen to know a guy named Zach who was Jeannie Riddle's legislative assistant. Would you like me to put you in touch? I said, absolutely. So I set up a meeting with Senator Riddle. The morning of that meeting, I get this letter back from the health department. The operative sentence being, it has been determined the department has no records showing honey as the cause of any foodborne illness. I handed this to Senator Riddle. She got a nice smile on her face. She said, this is going to be helpful. So I talked to her about, first of all, is this something we can do? She said, yeah, this seems like a fairly simple issue. I told her about the skepticism about passing it that year. And she turned to Zach and she said, that bill we passed for the concrete workers last year, didn't we introduce that in March? And he said, yep, and that was a lot more complicated than this was. We can get this done. So from there, it was a matter of us rewriting this bill, because what she told me was that jams and jellies were now covered on the Cottage Food law that had passed in 2014. So rather than write a new bill for honey, she said, let's just pull jams and jellies out of this one. We'll make this the honey law and we'll change it accordingly. Because, and I explained to her, there's no reason for honey to be associated with jams and jellies, because unlike honey, jams and jellies can spoil. You can have things go wrong with them if you don't do it right and they're not properly sealed. Honey is an inherently safe food product. So in this case, MSBA had actually done me a favor by passing on this, because if you've ever sat on a committee and tried to write anything, we'd been a couple months earlier trying to write a mission statement for the group and spent 2 or 3 hours, finally come up with something that sounded like every mission statement of every beekeeping club across the country. It's just a waste of time. In this case, I was able to sit down with Jeannie and her assistant and haggle over this language. I basically said, we basically went back and forth between what she thought we could pass and what I thought beekeepers could live with. And one of the things the 3 things that we wanted to do when we formed our committee was, first of all, the kitchen had to go. Okay, that was obvious. And she said, yeah, that should be a piece of cake. The other thing was that label language, basically warning people that it wasn't extracted in a full kitchen. And she said, yeah, I don't know about that, because remember, we want this to be simple, to move it faster. Everything we change is gonna raise question marks. It might be a problem. And I said, this is a really important thing, because it kind of flies in the face of our whole premise, which is that inherent safety of honey. When we're putting a warning label on there telling them it's not inspected, we're sending the opposite message. So she said, okay, how about we pull it out? And if we get too much pushback, and if that's what the difference between us getting it passed, we'll put it back in. And I said, fine. And the other issue was that $30,000 threshold, which I was in no danger of reaching, but I just thought it's silly to have it, because it's just an arbitrary figure. Basically, you're picking on the big guy for no good reason. And she said, there's no way we're going to pass anything that doesn't make a distinction between regular people like you and the big commercial producers. But the good news is the Cottage Food Act sets a limit of 50,000, so we can easily bump it up to that. Nobody will bat an eye. And with all these questions, I said, okay, who do you expect to oppose this? She immediately said, well, the urban and suburban legislators. She was a little surprised when I told her most of the beekeepers in the state live in those urban and suburban districts. We're not just all a bunch of country hicks out here. So maybe I was, but not everybody was. So she was kind of surprised at that. So then she came back to me and she said, now, I need to be able to demonstrate the beekeepers of this state they want this. This isn't just some disgruntled constituent of mine who wants a favor. And I said, I'm on the board of Missouri State Beekeepers. I can do that. And of course, I was crossing my fingers as I said that based on what happened a couple of weeks ago. But I went back to the board and said, look, heard from my senator. She says we can pass it. If I send you the language of the bill, can you guys, consider it and vote on it? And they said, absolutely. And so Zach wrote up the bill, sent it to me. And the one thing I asked him was, in the previous jams and jellies law, it kept using the words processing and manufacturing. And I said, do me a favor and change those words to extracting and to harvesting and bottling, because we don't want to be considered a processed food, because that's kind of the whole crux of the matter. So he did that. MSBA board unanimously approved the language. And she introduced the bill a few days later. She also said, we need to have a companion bill introduced on the House side. So she suggested going to the House Ag Chairman, which I could not get a hold of. I found out pretty quickly, if you don't live in somebody's district, they don't really care who you are or what you want. So I got in touch with my new state rep who had taken Jeannie's place in the House. He got a hold of the chairman. The chairman immediately read the bill. I don't even think he read it first because it kind of, you didn't really know anything about it when we were in committee later. But anyway, we got both of these bills introduced, and we had about 2.5 months then to get these things through. So we got together, I asked 4 other beekeepers from strategic parts of the state, different regions, to come testify in the House Ag Committee and the Senate Ag Committee. And they were very supportive. I was amazed at how little pushback, really no pushback from committee members, the legislators. Their questions were all along the lines of, well, isn't honey like the perfect food? And isn't it good for allergies? And it never spoils? And, you know, going on, and you beekeepers are so important. And it was just a really neat experience. And it was cool too, because I'd had a couple of people tell me along the way, you guys need to get a lobbyist. And I said, we're not going to get a lobbyist. We don't want to pay a lobbyist. I don't want to deal with it, you know. So after this first hearing was over on the House side, we walked out of there, and one of the legislators walked out after us, Tracy McCreary. I think she's still a state senator now after getting term limited out of the House, but she followed us out and she said, I just want to tell you how refreshing it is to have real people come up here and plead their case rather than send some high-priced lobbyists to talk for them. So I was like, yes, I felt pretty good about that. So we testified in the first committee, and that same day, Jeannie came walking out of that room and said, by the way, the other hearing was just been rescheduled to tomorrow. So we had to scramble and make it back there the next day. I was fortunate at that time. The job I had, I was working for a printing company, but I was no longer running a press or something else important. I was in kind of an R&D role, so I could take off on a moment's notice like that without anybody really caring. So I guess you'd call me one of those non-essential employees. But we got these things both through that. Both committees did it, approved it unanimously. They sent it on. They both got easily approved in both houses. And then it was a matter of one of them having to get through the other side. Even though they're identical, the way the process works is that one got to go through, go to the other side, and then go to the governor after that. Well, after that, everything kind of went downhill fast. So you had, the session ended on May 15th. On the 5th, the Senate bill going back through the House went through a House committee that loaded it up with unrelated amendments, basically killed the bill. They had 4 or 5 bills, other unrelated bills that couldn't pass on their own. So it's like, oh, let's load it onto this one that nobody's opposed to, and maybe we'll sneak it through. But it became obvious that it was going nowhere. So we had to concentrate on the Senate passing the House bill. Well, on Tuesday of that last week, that ends on Friday, the Senate shut down over a right to work fight. The Republicans had solid majorities like they've had for a couple of decades, and they decided that was the year they were going to pass a right to work bill. The Democrats said, look, we know you've got the votes for this, but if you jam this through, we're going to shut down this place and filibuster everything from the morning prayer to the closing bell, and you're not going to get anything else done. And they called each other's bluffs. They passed the right to work. The Senate shut down on Tuesday. And so then we're back stuck with this bill in the House that's unpassable because all the other junk attached to it. So we went back. I sent out another email blast to my MSBA list, to the local club leaders, said, please, beg your people to have leadership pull these amendments and whatnot. Then things got even worse. Wednesday morning, Kansas City Star broke a story about the House Speaker having a dalliance with a 19-year-old intern. That whole place shut down for 2 days. Finally, on Friday morning, they opened back up, elected a new speaker, got together in the afternoon and said, let's pass some stuff. We were on 32 bills that passed that day out of the hundreds that were still in the pile, and they pulled it up, and it was kind of cool because somebody told me you can actually listen to debate on the House floor. So I was listening, I was sitting at my desk at work, non-essential employee. In my defense, I was pretending to work. I had this on low on my computer, and I heard the thing come up, and I recognized a couple of the voices from that first committee pleading our case for us, and they pulled it up, stripped the amendments, and passed it. So here's where we are now. Jams and jellies are separate. We can now sell direct or wholesale, no label required. We got that exemption applied up to $50,000. That would change later. And it's important to note that your local governments can be more strict. They can't be more lenient, but they can pile other stuff on there, and some of them do. And I'll give you an example in a bit from St. Louis County. So here's a few of the other odds and ends that you need to know. If you're adding anything to it, you're putting lavender, infusing it with lavender or peppers or any kind of thing like that. That's a completely different story. Now you are a food processor. The cottage food law does not really apply. That's more like a jams and jellies and breads and herbs and things like that, but it's kind of puts you in under another thing called the Missouri Food Code. And if you Google Missouri Food Code, it'll pull up a document that'll give you information on it. But basically, it's along the same lines as where we were before, where you've got to label it and no third-party sales. And then we have creamed honey. Okay, creamed honey, we've always gone ever since we passed it. I've always told people it's still honey, right? You're adding a starter to it that's also honey. There's nothing in there besides honey. It operates under the same law. Well, this has changed. I started getting calls within the last year about people saying, hey, I'm getting in trouble with my inspector in such and such a county, and I'm going back and saying, no, that's not the case. And they're coming back and they said, yes, it is. And I had a lengthy email exchange and then phone conversation with a guy named Ainsley Lackley, who was like the lead food inspector or something like that from the Missouri Health Department. And what he told me was that in 2018, Missouri adopted this federal regulation. It's FDA's Good Manufacturing Practices, which has this whole range of regulations, and honey is mentioned in there. And the two words that Missouri is using out of that is formulating and mixing, which equals we're now a processed food again. The fact that we're stirring this in, we're changing something, and so now we're food processors. So we need that kitchen if we're going to do third-party sales. In St. Louis County, you can't even make creamed honey and sell it without, I mean, you can't, well, this all applies to cream honey. In St. Louis County, you can't make creamed honey and even sell it direct to consumer. It's just completely out unless you have that kitchen. And I've had two different people, and I haven't been able to find, is anybody else finding this? I've had two people tell me this in the last couple of months, that there's different inspectors that have told them that. I've not been able to find anything online. I can't find the operative law, but that's what I'm being told. Yeah.
Is that where it's sold? So I make price can I sell it?
See, that's the thing. Nobody cares. That was the whole that was the whole problem with one of the big problems with the state laws, the old honey law, jams and jellies. And that was one of the points that we made to the legislators. This is picking on Missouri beekeepers. I can go to the store and find Illinois honey sitting on the shelf next to Missouri honey. You know, and Missouri honey has to be done in an inspected kitchen, but nobody's checking the Illinois honey, or worse yet, the Chinese honey, whatever's coming in from anywhere, you're discriminating against your own state's beekeepers. So I suspect that's the same way with there. As long as you're not living in St. Louis County, you're kind of untouchable by them, and they just assume that it's legal where you are. So, you know, I'm kind of making an assumption there, but I think it's an educated assumption the way these things work. And as far as this question, nobody's going to ask me. Somebody asked me. I have no idea. This guy Ainsley Lackley I was talking to, and I think, were you the first one that told me that? Yeah, Jim Masucci was talking to me a year ago or something like that, and saying, did you talk to that guy too, or was it somebody else?
It depended on the department. Talk to one department and they said, oh, you don't. Very good. And it's registered. So they sent me to someplace else.
Yeah.
Said, yeah, maybe, but you have to go to this department to find out which department sent me there.
Yeah.
They sent me. I have.
Yeah. Yeah, and I asked Ainsley that, and he told me, and I said I had no idea because I didn't understand what he told me what the reason was, but it didn't make a lot of sense to me. But it wasn't something I was going to argue, so I let it go. But
Right, but all of this stuff.
yeah. Maybe it's one of those I'm going to talk about in a minute, but anyway, you know, like I said, I don't really know the reason, but even though it still says that in the honey law, they don't enforce it anymore. So all you people that are out there producing, you know, 5,000 pounds of honey and selling for $10 a pound and hitting that limit, you're free now. So what do I need on my label? You need the ingredient, okay? Honey, you can call it black locust honey or whatever. I think here again, people get away with a lot of stuff. I think it's supposed to be a percentage. I don't even think it needs to be over 50%. I think it needs to be the dominant nectar in that honey for you to be able to say, this is black locust honey. When we got that really clear honey, we told people it's black locust honey. We didn't put it on the label, but we could have. But that's a little bit fuzzy, but basically you need to say there's honey in there, and or pure honey is what we say, pure Missouri honey. You got to have your name or a company name. You got to have contact info. Depending on which of these laws you read, they generally say address. You figure street address. I know we had Department of Weights and Measures one time at a state meeting saying you basically need contact information, some way for people to get a hold of you. So most people go with the street address is the same thing. A lot of people don't want to put it on there. They don't want people coming seeing their where the beehives are. But basically, I haven't seen people really get in trouble for this. So put a phone number, email, or something on there. I had one person tell me, well, you know, you have to be reachable. And they mentioned the Amish. Like the Amish don't have phones. But if you have a listing like in a local yellow pages or something, like, really? The Amish don't have phones, but they have yellow pages? Okay, that makes sense. So there's a lot of silliness out there. And then net weight has to be in ounces and grams. Oddly enough, nobody ever, this botulism thing was never even a requirement under any of these laws. And it's a very rare thing, but really it's the only thing that anybody ever is worried about with honey. And that wasn't even a requirement. So this is one of my labels. So just basically got the basic stuff on there. And I've got this thing about crystallization on the back. In some places, depending on who you're selling to, grocery stores might require one of those deals, but that's not a requirement under the law. Yeah,
It said there specifically unfiltered. Obviously, as you're extracting and filling, you're filtering. What constitutes, why have that?
good question. Next question. So that, that's a good question. What is filtering? Filtering is generally consumed, putting it through something fine that's going to take the pollen out of it. There's all kinds of filters. What I use is the biggest of that set of 3 filters. So there's definitely pollen that gets through there because it'll float to the top of my buckets and that. I used to just use like a kitchen sieve, too much junk in there. And there was one time I saw a mite get through there and I was like, okay, I got to get something a little bit finer than that. But basically, people worry about filtration, just taking the good stuff out of there, the pollen fragments. But we still got plenty of that through that coarse filter, the wax and the pollen. So honey is sold by weight. If you're new at this, if you sell a pint of honey, it's not 16 ounces. It's 24 ounces. It's basically 1.5 weight ounces to a fluid ounce. And if you're buying bottles or jars that say they are honey bottles, they should be measured to that amount. So if you buy 12-ounce honey bears, they should be 8 ounces fluid and to weigh 12 ounces. And there's, the age-old question of, people worry about that. That's really a matter of, it's just a matter of preference. Some people like the glass better. I've had people come to the house and say, I only want it if you got it in quart jars and not plastic, and we can do that. I like this one. This pops up all the time on social media. What are we charging for honey now? First of all, that's collusion if we tell you. But secondly, it's all over the place. You can go down the street to the first 5 stores you find with honey, and one of those is going to be twice the price of the high one's going to be twice the price as the low one. It's whatever the market will bear. It's what that clientele is willing to pay, and also how badly that beekeeper wants to get rid of his honey. So if you got a lot of honey you want to get rid of, you're going to price it. You don't want to deal with it. You want to sell it before it crystallizes or whatever. There's always going to be people that undercut you and aggravate you, but sometimes you're going to be the person undercutting somebody else. Okay, sales taxes. Yes, honey is a sales tax item, but it's a food. So food sales tax is 3% less than the regular sales tax. So whatever your local sales tax is, you drop 3% from that. Some people I know, when we sell person to person, we just we give it a flat rate and then we figure that later. So I'll sell a $10 bottle of honey. I'll figure later, okay, that was actually $9.62 or whatever. I figured out that way. Rather than make it difficult for the customer, I make it difficult for myself when I pay my taxes. And yeah, the nice thing about wholesale is that the retailer has to deal with that. So yeah,
So they're selling it to the end user. They sell wholesale to the restaurant. They are the end user.
right. Yeah. So I guess where it gets difficult then is if they're selling some of it in the restaurant store and lobby and the rest, using some of it in the food. But you can work that out with them. Okay, this is an interesting thing here. For sales of handicraft items, I called the Department of Revenue last week and asked them what constitutes a handicraft item. We're producing honey. We're also selling some candles and beeswax-based products. Pretty sure those are handicrafts. Not sure about the honey. She said, send an email to the department at this email It's been like 8 days. I haven't heard back. I got an automated response saying, we take these in the orders they come. Please allow 3 to 4 weeks. So I don't know when I'll hear from them. The reason I asked them, I'm about to turn 65, so I want to know. But the one thing she did tell me is that it takes effect the day I turn 65. It's not for the whole year, or it's not next year. It's middle of the year. So like that's not going to complicate things. But I don't sell much of that stuff anyway. So oh, and this is a great one. If you sell your honey at a farmer's market, or these other products, if you're selling at a farmer's market, it's not taxable. As long as it stipulates as long as you are a regular at that farmer's market. You can't just say, oh, I'm gonna show up at the farmer's market one Tuesday in May and sell my stuff and it's tax-free. Not that anybody's checking how many Tuesdays you were there, but by the law, it has to be a regular thing, and that can also be a farm stand, or even one of these honor stands outside your house. I don't know what's going on here. I wonder if our battery ran out. Yeah, battery's dead. Well, great. Took me 10 minutes to figure this thing out before. Any second. Ooh. Hey, I can learn, just like lab rats. Okay. Okay. And I like this one too. And talk about complicating things. So this is a state coming down to the counties and the municipalities saying, if somebody's selling product off of their farm, you're not allowed to tax them. You're not allowed to make them get a permit, any of these kind of things. They still have to pay us the sales tax, but you guys can't do anything with it. So I actually noticed this when I was going to renew my business license with Lincoln County that I had for like 10 years. And I noticed this on their website. Why didn't you guys ever tell me I don't have to do this? It took me a year and several round and round with the state assessor or the county assessor before I finally convinced her to drop me from this so I don't have to pay. And it's $25, you know. It's to just tell you how cheap I am. I fought pretty hard for that $25 a year, but it was the principle of the matter. So they've actually made this stuff easier over the years. You can go out. You have to register with the state in order to charge the sales tax. You go there and you get what's called a fictitious name. So Melissa here came up with her company name. That's her fictitious name. So it's Melissa McGillicuddy, doing business as McMillies Honey. You got to go, that's the Secretary of State. You got to go to the Department of Revenue, register your business. They're going to tell you, you got to go to the IRS, get an EIN, because they need that to put you in the system. So you do all that. It sounds like a huge pain in the neck, but it's really, like I said, it's a lot simpler than it used to be. You can just hire a lawyer to do it. If you know, it's again, since it's fairly simple, it shouldn't cost you too much. While you're at it, I recommend that you get incorporated. It just puts a line between you and your business. So if somebody comes along and sues you for whatever reason, they got stung by one of your bees, they got a rash from your chapstick or something, you know, they're suing the business, they're not suing you personally. And it's still a good idea to get insurance too. I also did that, but yeah, I got incorporated about 10 years ago or something. So now anytime I hear the politicians complain about the evil corporations, I'm like, yes, that's me. So I got these handouts that kind of list all these various little guidelines and stuff. You guys want to pass those back? I think I'm going to switch to this thing, right? How does this work? Is this working? Is this working? Is this working? Okay, I'll talk loud. Can you guys hear me back there? All right.
This one over here is
Huh?
Test,
Oh,
test.
there's something on the front? Okay. Oh, okay. All right, let's try this. Yeah,
He does say the stand, it's like his report, would it just be a sign that says, I'm selling one here, or you actually have to have a little?
yeah, I think so. Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, it doesn't have to be an actual constructed stand. Yeah, it's just there's honey for sale. Yeah, that should be fine. So, we're gonna talk a little bit about just preparing for winter. I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in August. You guys see this on your hives? It's always interesting. It always freaks people out if they haven't seen it before. First thing they think is, oh no, my bees are all swarming. What am I going to do? And how am I going to do it? And then the next thing they say is, okay, they need ventilation. And you hear this all the time. And when you ask people, oh yeah, well, you just need more ventilation. I'm not sure that's the case. Look at the close-up here. You see what they're doing. They've got this big wide entrance. They've got it half covered. Over here, we got it more than half covered. Here again, we've got that covered up. I can't even see the entrance there. They're even covering up my other creative entrances where my boxes are falling apart. So they're not lacking for entrance. By the way, these are actually skateboards, you know, the things you put under the hive to get bees out under your supers. So they had vent holes there, and I'd use them as spacers when I put ApiGuard on, and I taped them off. Well, meantime, they propolize them shut anyway, so I don't have to do that anymore. But anyway, they've got everything closed up. They want to control that airflow in the hive. They don't need you to give them all that insulation. In fact, people go out and buy these things. This is, people call them, they're a ventilated inner cover. The other thing is they're actually a moving screen. So you put these on your hive. If you're going to move your hives, especially when it's warm, you can't close, you want to close up the entrance so they can't get out, right? But you got to give them airflow. So you put that thing in place of your inner cover, and you can see it's got it's beveled here, so you can put the outer cover on, but that air can get out so they can breathe while you're transporting them across town or wherever you're going, so you're not asphyxiating them. So I've got a couple of these, and I moved a hive one time. I left that thing on, came back 2 weeks later. The heat of the summer, they're propolizing this already. They don't want all that ventilation on there. They're trying to regain control over their airflow. Another thing people do is they put the screen bottom boards on. Now these are handy for some things, okay? The screen bottoms are initially, they initially came out, I don't know, maybe they were around before this, but when I first heard of them was when Varroa came along, and people said you can get rid of some of your Varroa by putting a screen bottom board on the bottom. When those mites come out of the cells with the baby bees, a lot of them will fall off and they'll drop to the bottom of the hive, and they'll lie on their back, and they'll quest, they'll wave their legs around and grab onto the first passing bee, hitch a ride back up into the brood nest. Well, if you got a screen in your bottom board, they fall through the ground and they're gone. That was kind of the reason behind this. Then they became handy for those things. You can get mite counts. You can count your mite drop and get an idea of your mite loads, how many mites are falling on this board. But then people also use them because they feel they need that ventilation. And I've had people tell me, well, I used to have that bearding, but then I put screen bottom boards on. Now they're not bearding anymore. They don't need, they've got that ventilation. Yes, they're not bearding anymore. I'm not sure it's for the reason you think though. What I think is they're going inside and they're all covering that screen to get rid of that extra ventilation you put on. They don't need to be outside. They just need to be out of the brood nest, because what they're doing is they're getting out in the heat of the summer. They're trying to control the airflow. They're also trying to evaporate moisture off the honey. So they need to control that airflow, and they get a lot of the kids out on the porch so that they can do that. When you put all this ventilation on, what are you bringing in? All that hot, humid air that they're trying to gain control over. Here's another thing that people talk about are these slatted racks. I know Tim Shear uses these. I've got a couple of them. I don't use them. I use them for those spacers on the for the apigard. But the reason behind these are actually made for swarm control. Is the best use for them. This goes under your bottom brood box, and it's got this gap here where it's gathering space. It reduces the congestion in the hive. Extra bees can gather there, and when they're not out and about, and it gives you gathering space. So again, that's going to reduce your bearding, because they've got a place to gather in the hive rather than have to hang out on the outside.
So it's good.
Yes, that's good. And by the way, you notice these things, those slats are in line with your frames. This was the old style board here. They went in the other direction, but when the Varroa came along and people started using these bottom boards, they redesigned these things so that the Varroa fall through between the frames. They fall through between that too, rather than land on the other ones going the other direction. This is the old style, but it's brand new. I was up at Bee Culture, and Jerry Hayes pulled one of these out in a box, and it still had the old AI route instructions on there. He said, "You want this thing? Put it together. I want to see if it. Tell me if it's any good and which way those slats go." It was an unopened box, so I put it together, and yep, it was the old style from like 1980 or something. So in August, we should have most of our honey off by this time. You should have healthy colonies with laying queens and mite control. I'm not going to talk about that. That's a whole nother talk. But it's important what you're doing right now for how you're going through winter. First off, speaking of getting your honey off, you got all this drawn comb you need to deal with. You need to protect. There's two ways to protect these things from wax moths. The old way is the paramoth, and I mean it's a current way as well. It's moth crystals. Paradichlorobenzene is the chemical, as opposed to the naphthalene in mothballs, which are toxic. You do not want to put those in your bees. But these are sold for use in beehives, the moth crystals, the paramoth. So you want to make sure you get the right stuff. But you stack those supers, you put this on a piece of paper or cardboard over the middle of the top super, and then the air flow, it's heavier than air, and it goes down and it fumigates all these supers, and it keeps the moth eggs and larvae it kills them, keeps them from growing and destroying your comb. The other way to do it, and people have a problem with this because it can build up a little residue. People worry about the health things and all that kind of thing. So this one is more work. This is called Sertan or B402. It's actually it's a BT product. Bacillus thuringiensis. It's used in a lot of crops, but it's basically it's a bacterium that targets a specific organism. In this case, wax moths. They have these for corn borers and boll weevils and all these various crops, they treat these things with different types of BT. And the organic folks use it as well. But this is one targeted toward wax moss, and it's a concentrate. You mix it in water and you spray it on your combs. So this little bottle makes a gallon or something of water and of the solution. You put it in a spray bottle, and I just go, since I've got about 40 supers, something like that. And you just go frame by frame and the other side, stick it back in the box, and you do all these. And I stagger the boxes and let them dry overnight, and I stack them up in a stack, and they're good to go, and that'll protect them for a year. Now, it's important to realize that the bees or the wax moths are not technically attracted to the wax. They're attracted to the pupal casings. You know, when if the wax has had brood in it, those liners, you know, the little cocoons thing that the larvae spin in there, what's left over. So if you have the dark combs that have had brood in, that's what they're attracted to. Now, while they're there, they'll trash the combs. They'll chew it all up and just destroy it. But they're primarily attracted to that dark stuff. So if you have supers that have not had wax moths or have not had brood in them, the wax moths aren't going to touch it. And I kind of inherited a couple of hives one time. Some lady had them in her backyard. The beekeeper had died. She said they've been here 2 or 3 years. I just want them out of here. They had 2 deeps, queen excluder, and 2 or 3 supers on top. Everything below the queen excluder was just trash. It was just a bunch of black gunk from the destruction from the moths. Those combs and the supers were untouched. They were brittle from sitting out in the heat and the cold, but the moths had not touched them. It was amazing. I just kind of assumed they'd go through and trash the rest, but that really showed me that, yes, what I had been telling people was true, which is always nice to know. But so what I do is I have some supers that the bees have been, you know, the brood's been in, some that have not. So when I go through my supers and treat them, I go through, clean, that goes in this pile, 30, that, you know, brood, that goes in that pile. So I treat the ones I need to treat, the other ones I just stack up.
Did you just freeze them?
You can freeze them, but it has to do with the time of year also. So if you freeze them and you put them somewhere and protect them until the winter, till the cold weather, the wax moths are gone and you're good. You can just stack them up wherever there. Just don't forget them next year, because come summertime, those wax moths are out and about again, and they could get them if you're not on the hives. Yeah, that's a good question. So feeding. Why do you feed bees? There are various reasons that you feed them. You don't just feed them to, oh, well, you know, it's summertime, I should feed them. You want to feed to boost a new colony. This is why we always tell beginners, put that package on foundation and feed the heck out of them until they can draw that foundation, because they need the sugar for their wax glands to convert to wax. Yeah, like that. To stimulate brood rearing, you can feed them sometimes, even if you got a established colony, you want to get them going earlier in the spring, you can start feeding them some thin sugar to approximate nectar, and it kind of stimulates their brood rearing. Same deal with pollen. You can feed them pollen sub to get them going a little earlier. Of course, the big one is prevention of starvation. And that's what you worry about. Not so much this time of year, usually. I mean, unless you took all their honey from them, you shouldn't have to feed them to prevent starvation now, but you're gonna have to feed them in the fall if they don't restock themselves adequately before winter. And yeah, if you're feeding them now, I wanna know why, because there's something wrong now, because especially if they made honey for you, they should have filled themselves up on the bottom first. And then what kind of sugar are you feeding them? 1-to-1 is generally, that's like more like nectar, so it's a stimulative thing. The 2-to-1 is a little closer to honey, and so you feed that when you're planning on having them store it. Honeybee Healthy is some people consider it a feeding stimulant, and it is a feeding, it attracts the bees. You worry a little bit about that, maybe attracting bees from outside the hive if you're feeding it to a weak colony, but it's also got some essential oils, which they probably don't really need, but some people think they do, so they buy it for that reason. I don't feed that stuff. Then there are probiotic products, just like people take probiotics to improve their gut health and that. There's some products that are made to improve the bee's gut health. The science is not real strong on that. There's disagreements between different researchers, but by and large, from what I've read, it's not something that you really need. The probiotics, the microbes that you're feeding them are not the same microbes that are living in their gut. They're supposed to somehow improve their immunity so they can better produce their own microbes. I don't know. Like I said, the science is not that strong on it. Pollen sub, it's just what it sounds like. It's a substitute for pollen, so it's not as good as the real thing. If you are somewhere where you have a pollen dearth, which I have not yet found in Missouri, in either this county or the county where I live now, seems like we always got tons of pollen in the hive. I don't think we really need it. Now, people do feed this in the early spring also to boost the colony. If they're making splits or things like that early on, it can be helpful for that. I know a lot of the commercial beekeepers are feeding this stuff a lot because they're constantly brood building to keep those bees and make splits for reach their pollination contracts and such. Bananas, yeah, probably not. I don't know. There was a woman named Katerina Witt a few years ago that she was part of the Montana Master Beekeepers. She went through the Master Beekeepers program, and for her research project, she fed bananas to hives of bees to see if they improved their brooding and survival and whatnot. And apparently had good luck with it. It was a small study. She had said she was going to follow up, and as far as I know, she never did. But this kind of got a lot of press because it was just, a little different. And so a lot of people were feeding bananas for a while. I actually fed someone. I gave them to my 6 hives at home one year just to see what they do. And some of them took it. So, some of them consumed them. Some of them did not. Some of them just turned black, and I scraped them off the top later. But I don't know if they were actually consuming them or just hauling them out. Who knows? And I know that's something that Jerry Hayes has always said about pollen subs too. People say, "Oh yeah, I'm putting these pollen substitutes in, and they're eating them right up." And he says, "Are they eating them, or are they hauling them out like trash?" When you put something up above them like that, how does he say it? So you put something in the hive that didn't come through a part of hive they expect it to be, they don't consider it to be pollen. They consider it to be something that doesn't belong there, and they might just haul it out the front. So the winter bees, people worry a lot about feeding in the fall because we got to support these winter bees. Winter bees are the bees that are born going into winter. They're the last generation before winter, and they're different. For whatever reason, these winter bees survive the winter. Okay, they're rather than die after 6-7 weeks, like the summer bees, they have to last 4 months or whatever that length of time is until they start rearing new bees in the spring. So there's a couple of reasons that they do it, and the science, it's a relatively new science, I guess. I mean, there's a lot of studies going on. There's some disagreement on there too. I know I talked to Three Rivers about this a year or so ago, and Dan Schmel came up to me afterwards. And he didn't say you don't know what you're talking about, but he kind of said it in a nice way, like, there's still a lot of, a lot of research going on. It's not as clear as some people think it is, or whatever. But in any case, there's basically two reasons why they live longer. One is they are actually more robust. They have more fat body. They're more of a fat body. They're just kind of their immune system. They have large fat bodies. They're not rearing brood or foraging. And when nurse bees are rearing brood, they are consuming pollen or bee bread, and they're converting that to the jelly that they feed, either the royal jelly or the worker jelly that they feed the other bees. They're also depleting their own fat bodies to some degree. And if they're not rearing brood during the winter, they're not doing that. They're not losing any of that energy. And they're also not graduating to foragers who are out there flying to and fro and wearing themselves out. So they're in the hive, they're vibrating and to help keep the cluster warm and that, but otherwise they're not working the way they would normally be in the summertime. Now, when I mentioned that they're more robust, they're actually raised differently. This is in response, apparently, to the drop-off in natural pollen coming from the outside. It's a trigger for them to raise those winter bees that are going to last through the winter. So there was a study done that suggested that when you continue to feed pollen in the fall, thinking you're you're boosting those winter bees, what you're actually doing is delaying the production of winter bees because they're waiting for that pollen drop off. So you're raising a bunch more summer bees, and then you finally stop, and then they raise the winter bees. So you end up with the same amount of winter bees, but in the meantime, you had more summer bees eating up your food supply going into winter. It's not that simple, but that's one of the part of the confusion about all this. And if I sound confused, it's because I am still a little bit, but like I said, the science is not clear on it.
So you're saying do not feed pollen?
I'm saying you don't necessarily need to feed pollen to rear winter bees, but in our area, I don't think you need to feed it anyway. There was one time at a meeting, I won a door prize. It was a box of pollen patties, and I think it took me about 5 years, sat in my freezer, and a couple times I'd make a split or something, I'd put it on there, but I never felt like I really needed to, and finally threw the rest of them away because they were taking up space. But like I said, I always see gobs of pollen in my hives. I go in there in the spring and they still got all this bee bread still in the hive that they didn't use. And yeah, I'm getting to that part. For the winter time, if they are low in the fall, they're light, you do need to feed them those carbs. It's best that they have honey. So you don't want to take too much honey off them, but generally speaking, they're topping off their honey in the fall. You get a drought year, sometimes they're unable to do that, and you're going to have to feed some of these colonies. Usually we advise not to feed liquid. Some people do it, figure that it's in the hive, they'll take it, it doesn't get as cold, but generally speaking, we want to feed something solid or somewhere in between. Some people put like a liquid in a baggie and just put a slit, seal the baggie, put sugar syrup in there, seal the baggie, put a slit in there, and the bees can kind of go on top and access it. Ted Jansen had this thing called Ted's Mush, which was basically putting sugar in a bag, just adding enough water to make it a mush, and then set that up there again in the baggies, and they could come and get it. There are various candy board recipes. I used to use Bob Fink's recipe, which involved cooking on a stove top, get it to, I don't know, 220 degrees or something, and stir it up and do all this. And it worked real well. It made a nice hard candy board, and the bees took it. But it was difficult, especially For me, where I live now, I got an electric stove and that makes it more complicated. But Les Shelby over in like Quad County showed us how one time to use a KitchenAid to just make it without heating it. You just put a tiny bit of sugar into, or a tiny bit of water into sugar. I use 1 ounce to 1 pound, so a half a cup of sugar to a 4-pound bag. And you mix it up. You're basically just putting enough water in it to get it a little bit wet so that it will hold a shape kind of, and then you spread it out in this board and oops. So I'll put some in the KitchenAid and then I'll just dump it out here and kind of push it down. I'll do a couple of go arounds because the thing's not very big. And depending on, you can do as much as you want, however much you think that your bees in this hive will need, but you put it on here and you push it down, kind of spread it out, and the next day you come back and it's hard. It's not as hard as the cooked stuff is, but it's, by the end of the winter, it's pretty, you put it on a shelf and next month, it's pretty hard. So it doesn't require any mixing. Now, there are a couple of candy boards that I've had. This is just a homemade one, but it's basically like a glorified inner cover, only it's got space up above so you can put this candy up here. I got away from using these because you would just see, the bees would come up here and they just kind of, that hole would widen and widen until they went and got it all. But I had a colony die one time because they were clustered over here and couldn't get to that sugar up here, and they starved right here, and said, okay. So now I only use these kind with a screen on the bottom. This is actually an Isabee's one, I think. But so this has just got a screen. It's got a 1/4 inch between here, so the bees can get up through there. But you put the candy on here. Now I put down a newspaper or something. I put paper towel, and you put that down there when it's wet. It kind of soaks into the towel. But then when I put it on the hive, I take my hive tool and just kind of scrape here and there to kind of expose it, just in case they don't taste it through the paper towel, just enough to get them started in there, and they take this stuff pretty well. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yep. Not above the inner cover. No. This goes on the frames, on your top brood box, and then you put the inner cover on top. Now, the other thing a candy board does is that moisture that comes up from respiration, it actually soaks into this candy board. So people who are worried about the moisture on the top of their hive, this actually absorbs some of that moisture too. And that also makes it easier for them to tear into because it's a little bit moist. Now, I've also done, I know the first time I went to one of my new first hives, I went in spring to check them, or in the winter to check them, and I lifted that box was light as a feather. Those guys were starving. I ran home, got a bag of sugar, just dumped it on top of the top of the inner cover and poured some through there and said, come and get it. And I'd called that my drive-by feeding. I've done that a couple times. Well, later somebody referred once to mountain cap feeding. I said, what is that? Huh? So I had to put it down and I forgot. Somebody referred to mountain camp feeding. Well, it turns out that was basically like my drive-by feed, just feeding them dry sugar on the top. Basically, you do whatever you got to do. Important thing is you don't let them starve. Pollen, again, I don't think they need it around here. They have a lot of stored pollen that they take with them into winter, and it's enough for them to raise those first bees as they're coming out of winter. And what kind of stimulates their brood rearing in late winter is the fact that they're bringing in pollen from the outside. And some people do feed pollen through winter, they figure they need it. Some people will feed them, I had, some guy was saying he feeds them, sugar syrup with a little bit of pollen mixed in it so that they continue to raise bees all year, all winter long. I don't know why you want that. You're just eating, you just raise, you're not, because you're basically raising short-lived bees and they're just, you're gonna have to feed them more. And I'm not sure we want a booming population coming out of winter anyway. I mean, if your goal is to make early splits and you've got a source of queens to put in them, yeah, then that's fine. But keep in mind that any early population boosting that you're doing is also going to make your swarm season earlier. So you gotta be able to do something with those populations rather than, besides just letting them land in the neighbor's trees. So what else do we need? Mouse guards are definitely a necessity. We want to get those on about the time that it gets cold, where mites are looking for a place to go in and keep warm. Beehives are nice and warm. You don't want to wait until after the mouse is inside before you put the mouse guard on. Quilt boards, I talked about that moisture. The quilt boards for a while were all the rage. I haven't heard that much about them in the last couple of years. Everybody's worried about that moisture. I know when I started, the old timers were saying, you gotta ventilate that hive because sorry, I got distracted. Some guy's waving a sign at me back. You gotta ventilate that hive. It's not the cold that kills them, it's the moisture. It's that moisture condensing on the top and raining down on them, and that's what freezes them and kills them during the winter. So you gotta have an upper entrance. We're kind of getting away from that stuff. What Bob Fink told us a few years ago, and I don't remember, it might have been at EMBA, first time I heard it. He puts one of these on top of every hive in the winter, above his inner cover. Just a board on the top. What this does is it makes this the warmest surface. So the water does not condense, that moisture from their respiration, it doesn't condense here. It goes and it condenses and runs down the sides. They actually need water in the winter, just like they do in the summer. They need it. Well, everybody needs water to live, but they also need it to break down that honey when they consume that honey. So you're not doing them any favors by putting a gap on the top where that moisture is going to be venting out. Now people, if you're using actual insulation, that's not going to hurt anything. In fact, there's actually evidence that suggests they're going to use less honey. They're going to survive better over winter if they're in a well-insulated box, if it's insulated all the way around. And that's a matter of if you want to spend the money and go through the trouble. We're kind of where we are, it's not cold. I grew up in Wisconsin. My dad had bees. He would put a stack of straw bales on the north side, protect them from the harsh wind. Otherwise, he didn't wrap them or anything like that. It did all right for the most part. So I figured if they did it up there decades ago, they survived here too. Tar paper, I don't recommend just the black tar paper. It's not providing any insulation. It's just warming the hive when the sun shines, which can give you problems if that weather is borderline. They warm up too much. They think it's warm outside. They go out and some of them freeze and don't make it back. Like I said, wind breaks. We're up on a hill. I should probably do this. I don't, but I had a guy a couple of years ago sent me a story. There's a journal that he had about how he overwinters his bees, and he's got a shed where he's got electric, and the bees are kind of under the lean-to of the shed. He runs electric to these hives, and everyone, as I remember it, everyone had a empty box below where there was a light bulb, and this light bulb was on, keeping those bees warm all winter long. And I turned down the story. So first of all, how many of us have electricity out to our bees? Plus, I just didn't think it was a good idea. So that's one of those things. It really comes down, people will sell you any number of things to put in your hives, and not all of them are necessary. The basic thing is you want to make sure that they're healthy and they have plenty of food. So I wrote a kind of poking fun at some of these things. I wrote an editorial 3 or 4 years ago called the Grinchy Beekeepers, basically saying how, there's all these things out there that people do for their bees, and I just put them in a wooden box and stick them outside and say, see you in the spring. And one of my favorite Christmas show growing up was The Grinch, and I love this part where he comes out, on Christmas Day, and he's just amazed that Christmas, still survives. And I can't do Boris Karloff, but I'll read this rhyme. It's and the Grinch, with his Grinch feet ice cold in the snow, stood puzzling and puzzling. How could it be so? It came without ribbons. It came without tags. It came without packages, boxes, or bags. And he puzzled 3 hours till his puzzler was sore. Then the Grinch thought of something he hadn't before. Maybe Christmas, he thought, doesn't come from a store. Maybe Christmas, perhaps, means a little bit more. So I turned this around and made it the Grinchy Beekeeper, coming out on that first day of spring and being amazed how those intrepid bees actually somehow made it through. And the beak, with his beak feet all wet in the grass, stood puzzling and puzzling. How did they all last? They lived without tar paper or electrical coil. They lived without quilt box or essence of oil. Then the beak thought of something he hadn't been taught. Maybe bees can survive without something I've thought. Maybe they've done just that for more years than we've thought. And as I'm writing this, I'm thinking, I work for a company that sells beekeeping supplies. Fortunately, they don't read the magazine, so I didn't get any trouble. Yes.
So I went, I studied dad down and I got some and they're telling me that in Missouri, it's really important to put the guard between your top and bottom box instead of at the top. And I always thought the top should be, if they're trying to carry it through, right?
Yeah, the way that it works, from what I understand, comes from the bees carrying it through. They drag it down through the brood nest, so that everybody is exposed to it. Do you agree with that, Jim? Okay. Yeah, from what I've read, from the way I've heard Randy Oliver explain it, you want them to drag that through the brood boxes. Yeah, I had somebody I was mentoring last year or the year before told me that he bought it and somebody told him stick it between the boxes, and in fact he kind of just smashed it between the boxes, and I said, no, that's not the way you do it. It's supposed to be carried through. Yeah. Yes. Well, okay, you're protecting any boxes that are not on the hive. Yeah, so the brood boxes are on the hive, you don't. Yeah, yep. But the brood boxes especially, you'd have to protect. Yeah, you definitely want to, because they'll go after them fast. If you have that dead out in the fall or something, you set those in the shed and forget about them for a couple of weeks, you come back and they're a mess. Yeah, you definitely got to worry about them. Oh, so this is just like insulation board, like you buy at Home Depot or Menards. It comes in a 4 by 8 foot thing, and you just cut it to size. And these are 1 inch thick. You put it you put it above the inner cover. So you put that inner cover on, bunk this thing down, and then the outer cover on top of it. Nope, they don't need it because you don't, like I said, the notches for upper ventilation or escaping, they don't need that. Now, there are some people who have a small upper entrance in case the bees need to, like they get covered with snow or something, they figure they need to get out. What I've found is when you get a good snow, go out and look at your hives in the morning. It doesn't take long, they melt that entrance open. I mean, you can have snow drifted against those bottom two boxes, and you'll look and there's a little 1/8-inch gap there where just the warmth of the box, they don't technically heat the hive, they heat the cluster, but there's enough radiant heat, that the box is warm enough, it's going to melt that snow away, unless it really gets ice, stuck in that entrance. And that would be a rarity, but I don't really worry about that. Yeah. Anything else? Between the inner and outer cover. Yeah. Yeah, the outer covers it. Yeah, I've had two people tell me, and one lady sent me a picture where the bees were eating this away. She said, a couple of my hives, I'd open them up and they got like a hole in here where they're chewing this stuff away. I said, I've never seen that before. I could see if it was drywall or something, maybe it's a nutritional deficiency or something, but not this. Yeah. No, it's not. I eventually take them off just because they're in the way. But yeah, and actually some people, it may be helpful actually to leave it on. It's a little more insulation and, it can help preserve, conserve stuff.
No concern that the residue would fall for people to harvest the wax later for things.
No, it's a food safe thing and I don't think I don't know. Do you know anything about that, Jim? The BT, she's saying, is there any issue with BT residue? Yeah.
First off, it's very species. So even if you
So by the way, since I mentioned the magazine, I'm editor of the Bee Journal. Like I said, I brought a stack. There's a stack back there of odd journals for those of you who don't get it. If you subscribe to the journal, flip open the front page, and there's information. There's a number to call the office to subscribe. Ask them for the club discount. It's about a 12% or something discount if you belong to a local association. Just tell them I'm with the Eastern Missouri Beekeepers. I would like the club discount. Tell them the editor. She'll laugh, but she'll still give you the discount. So, okay, is that it? Yeah.
the slot was a good idea. I noted that I was saying this for
Talking about this? Yeah, this is, it can reduce your bearding. If you're worried about that, I don't worry about the bearding, but it's for swarm control. Some people use it for swarm control because one of the triggers for swarming is just congestion from large populations. So when they gather at night, for example, and everybody's inside, there's a lot of bees can hang out down here and they're not up in the brood nest crowding everybody. Good point. And I've noticed that with insulation too. Yeah, I mentioned I don't insulate my boxes, but there was one time when I bought one of those styrofoam boxes. I think it was from Better Bee at the time, it didn't hold up to the weather and hive tools and whatnot, didn't last longer than a couple of years, but I noticed that that queen was laying wall to wall in the early spring, whereas normally she's, you know, a couple frames away from it because it's cooler on the outside. Yes.
Cannot replace once you have hive.
Say that again?
The one you
The slatted rack? You can't do what?
start the new hive, but you cannot replace the bottom.
Well, yeah, well, you just have to take the hive apart to put it on the bottom. Yeah. Yep. So this is, I don't have a bottom board, but it just goes on top of on the bottom board. So where that bottom board is, then your entrance is right here underneath it. So they go in here and they come up through it. Okay. All right.
Thank you, Eugene. Appreciate it. Good info. Okay, does everybody have a raffle ticket? Because somebody could win a free short sleeve t-shirt. You have to pick from our inventory, though we don't take special orders. Okay, here I go. Here I go. This is it. 6872. Now the numbers that really matter. 382. This young lady right here, very good. Congrats. See Melissa back there. She will, just making sure. Nope, she's right. All right. Remember the picnic next in September 7th, Sunday, noon to 4. And no meeting here. So that's it for now. Thanks, folks. Be careful.